Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadare Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaja Patitana Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dhanyavad Pranam, devotees. All glories to Shri Jayadev Goswami. Today I believe is the appearance day or disappearance day of Jayadev Goswami. I am trying to catch up because now I am actually behind in questions and answers. There's just been a lot of things happening, and so I haven't been able to exactly keep up with all of the questions and answers that are coming in. So there are two things that I'll discuss today. They're pretty unrelated topics, but I will try to address both of them so that the one person who's doing some research, they can have access to the information that they requested and didn't mind me giving that information via this medium. And then the other thing is, very much applicable to devotees and our practice. Both things can be, but more specifically, the first topic that we'll deal with is more directly geared towards devotees in their practice. And the question was, gotta open the phone. The question was, why after many, many years of practice, I don't really feel anything. I'm not giving up my practice, and I fully have faith that Krishna is God and that I am his servant. But I am not feeling anything like I read in all of the various writings of our Srila Prabhupada. Okay? So, of course, the first thing that comes to mind would be that how we measure spiritual feelings is not the same as measuring material feelings. In the material world, because from time without any beginning, we've been accustomed to dealing with material energy, we have developed internally a metric for describing when we're happy and when we're not. And it's all based around our interchange with the material energy, or our interaction with the material energy. So, but when it comes to spiritual emotions, we don't or have not developed yet a true metric for understanding how spiritual emotion is arising. And even when there's indication of that spiritual emotion being present, sometimes we cannot recognize it. So I'm giving an example. If a person looks at where they have come from in general, even if it's 1 or 2 years ago, what to speak of if it's 20 or 30 years ago, this devotee didn't write how long they've been practicing. But no matter what the time period, when you take even a simple measurement of where you were prior to developing faith in Bhakti, and then take a really close look at where you are now, you can see that there's, in general, a gulf of difference, even in a short time. The things that interest you, the things that you no longer have taste in, the association you no longer may find desirable, these are all indications of the spiritual emotions at work, correcting our inner orientation towards serving Krishna. So though they're not things which come up to a level of being appreciable to our material metric of examining them, still they're at work, they're functioning. Ill to speak is if you've been chanting for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years, or some people 50 years, then it sometimes requires a deeper retrospective and inner perspective to find how spiritual emotion is working. Now, also, if the nature of how we have been practicing has been what Rupa Goswami calls as niyamagraha, it means more ritualistic or anusthanik. Anusthanik I explained before. Anusthan means Anu means something that's done continuously. So anustan means a situated practice or procedure or ritual that you do daily, right? That's anustanic activity. So if we've been practicing bhakti anustanic way or niyamagraha ritualistically, then it's much more difficult to grasp the emotional content coming from the practice of bhakti. In order to have a reciprocation with the emotional content that's coming, we have to create the emotional investment. And faith is the currency by which we do that. In other words, our faith is the basis under which we invest our emotions, because as I mentioned earlier, we're only familiar with material emotions, so sometimes it's hard to, well, how do I invest spiritual emotions? I don't have any, so it becomes confusing. But your faith itself, your faith is the currency that is the initial spark of spiritual emotion. So when you're investing faith in something, that is the first investment of a emotional content. And of course, we first invest faith in that which is within our purview, which means Sri Guru and sadhus. Because we may not have the experience of Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Shri Radha Krishna, certainly not. But we do have the experience of Guru and Sadhu, their causeless mercy, their sweet interactions, their correcting us through chastisement of love in various ways. So we have that experience. And those persons are not material. They are part of this spiritual agency. Sakshat Haritva. Sakshat Haritva Samashta Shastra. All Shastra says Shri Guru is Sakshat Haritva. Means he's directly the manifestation of Bhagavat Shakti in this world. That Bhagavat Shakti means Swarup Shakti, means Bhagavan's own internal energy descends in the form of Vyasti Guru, means our individual Guru. So that's our first centered focus of investing faith containing emotional content. And when we do that, then naturally it will arise in us a reciprocation that gives experiential feelings regarding emotion, spiritual emotion. Because spiritual emotions are experienced. They're not intellectual processes. They're not academic processes, right? They're not about gathering information, right? It's an experience, right? Just like if mundane example, which doesn't really give the full import of what spiritual emotions are, but just something to give an indication. When two people have some shared material emotion towards each other, there's also so much information that goes around that. The more you know about that person, their likes, their dislikes, their habits, their background, their this, their that, that becomes the basis for mutual interest. And that, is the basis under which you invest emotional content in that person and vice versa. They're investing in you and there's a reciprocation, right? Now, the experience of the reciprocation is not the knowledge. It's not, oh, I know where you were born. I know what you like. I know what your favorite color is. That's not, the information itself is not the emotional reciprocation. But those things, that knowledge gives rise to an emotional experience in relation to that person. So in the same way, when we have association of Sadhu Guru, and from Sadhu Guru, Sattam Prasanga Mamaveya Samvido Bhavanti Karana Rasanaya Kata, we hear the nectarian or medicinal, spiritually medicinal quality of their samvad, means their harikatha, etc. Then prasanga takes place. Prasanga means a association of a spiritual nature. And in that prasanga, spiritual emotions are exchanged. When Sadhu Guru comes and they give harikatha, their heart should be vested there. It's not an academic exercise. I'll come, let me see, I have memorized so many verses, I'll jot it down, I'll do like this, and then I'll just, recite everything, and that's good. I've given class. Rather, the sadhu or the Vaishnava or the aspirant even, they will think I'm serving the spiritual sound vibration of the glories, name, pastimes, etc. of Sriman Mahaprabhu and Shri Radha Krishna. By having that attitude of service, then that kata will reciprocate and give spiritual, experiential feelings in the heart. Those feelings are then is what is being shared on the subtle platform. That's what's being shared with the listeners of the Harikatha. It's not just everybody is collecting the data. You're speaking so much information, they're collecting the data. The underlying exchange is an emotional one. The emotions in the speaker from serving the Harikatha, and the emotions in the hearer from serving by hearing the Harikatha. So in this way, everything about our practice, from our morning sadhana, how we will approach our japa, how we will approach our guru-given mantras, how we will approach the Mangalarati, beginning with our Guru Ashtakam, or the Mahima or glories of Guru, all of those things is where you make your emotional investment. And the information and knowledge that's inherent in those things, like an example, inherent, and I've spoken about this a lot, I think it's really apropos because everybody does it. But when you sing Guru Ashtakam, I just not too long ago did another question and answer where I brought the same point up. When you sing Guru Ashtakam, there should be a meditation that accompanies the singing. Whether you're leading the Guru Ashtakam or whether you're one of the responders or echoing the leader of the kirtan, you should have meditation going on. Who is my Guru Dev? How he saved me from samsara, how he's brought me to the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu, how he allowed me to witness the mood of the kirtan, right? Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita. Mahaprabhu's dancing and singing is of the nature of the highest class of praying because it's Krishna tasting the mood of Radha. So all these things should come within your dhyan, your meditation while you're singing. Therefore, there can be emotional reciprocation because then when you get to the 7th verse and you'll say, oh, Sakshadari Tvena Shamashta Shastriya. All the Shastras have declared how glorious my Gurudev is. And I am so fortunate that Gurudev plucked me out of the suffering of samsara and has placed me in this position. In the verse prior to that, 6th stanza, oh, Ni Kunja Yuno Rati Keli Siddhai, my Gurudev has revealed his Swarup as an intimate servant of Shri Radha Krishna Yugal. How fortunate am I? 4th stanza, Chaturvidashi Bhagavat Prasad. Guru has given me the methodology by which to taste the 4 kinds of Bhagavat Prasad. It means also bhog, when it's offered to Bhagavan and you taste that food remnant. This is one meaning. But another meaning here of Chatur Prasad, 4 kinds of Prasad, means Krishna's 4 kinds of sweetness. Venu Madhuri, Rupa Madhuri, Lila Madhuri, Prem Parikar Madhuri. So Guru arranges in the heart of the disciple how to taste, through doing bhajan, these 4 types of Krishna Madhuri. You understand? So when the meditation starts to become deep, naturally emotional content arises. Respect, gratification, adoration, all kinds of emotional content begin to arise. You understand? And then we begin to think, oh my Gurudev, for life after life that I've been in the material world, Chakudan Dilo Ye, Janami Janami Prabhu Se, Divyagan Ride Prokashito. Throughout so many lives, my Gurudev has come to save me. And he has sprinkled Divya Gyan, this transcendental knowledge, in my heart, birth after birth. And now we gradually see ourselves elevating in bhakti more and more and more. Whatever challenges still may be there, and there may in fact be some, no doubt. Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur Pad has laid out in Madhurya Kandamini all the peaks and valleys of the journey through bhakti. So it's not that there will always be, necessarily a smooth flow. Everybody's karmic DNA and their bhakti DNA from bhakti samskars are different. So some people have challenges, some people have less challenges because in the previous life they had more challenges. You understand? So it's all individual. But the ability to reciprocate with bhakti, the secret is in the things that I'm mentioning here. There has to be, through faith, emotional investment. And that emotional investment means as the knowledge regarding Bhagavan, regarding Sadhu Guru comes to you, you have to take the essential ingredients of that knowledge as the means to fuel an emotional relationship. In the same way, knowing all the different things about your significant other, right, fuel how you feel about them in a material sense. So with Bhagavan, it's just transcendental. All the things you know of, Sadhu Guru, my Gurudev's Harikatha, my Gurudev's sweet moods, my Gurudev, then the history of Sri Gurudev, all these things fuel an emotional connection. And sometimes one of the reasons why a person may not be experiencing emotional content in their practice of bhajan is because the nature of the relationship with Guru should be examined more closely. It means the nature of relationship with Guru Sadhu may be not so developed. You understand? Or it could be the nature of the Sadhu Guru that the mood is not, what should I say? The mood is not as conducive to having those experiences. Because if Sri Guru, for instance, has Guru Abhiman, I've spoken about this as well, then it obfuscates the purity of the reciprocal energy coming from the spiritual paradigm to be shared. Because the Guru is tasting, oh, I am Guru. Or the Sadhu is tasting, I am Sadhu. Or even if it's Kirtan, the Kirtaniya is tasting, oh, I have such a great voice, I'm such a great Kirtaniya. Any aspect of service to Bhagavan, if any kind of self-abhiman comes where the person is trying to taste some enjoyment from the element of pratishta involved there, it will obfuscate the purity of the reciprocation of the mood inherent in the spiritual substance, right? So if, for instance, in Harikatha, if the person thinks, yes, I'm speaking very, very nicely. Yes, I'm a very great scholar. Oh, yes, I know all Bhagavan, all Bhagavatam, all Bhagavad Gita, all Vedic Sastra. I'm a veritable walking library. And there's constant meditation on the happiness derived from feeling like you're a scholar. That will obfuscate the pure exchange of the Harikatha, which doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to Bhagavan. It is the Mahima, glory of Bhagavan. And it is the Kripa and the mercy of our Guru Parampara, and especially our Guru Dev and Sadhus. We've not invented Sastra. We've not invented the conceptions behind Sastra, right? So what is our only function here? It is really instrumental in terms of being a vehicle by which to express it. And even that's mercy on us, because by that service, we get the benefit of the advancement in Bhakti. Much like Krishna told Arjuna in the Battle of Kurukshetra, you can be an instrument, but everything has already been done. So similarly, everything is already the arrangement of Bhagavan and our Guru Parampara. So we can only be instrumental. And in that way, there should not be any pride. And if there is no pride, you'll taste the reciprocation from the mood of service, and you won't obfuscate the glory and the sweetness of the katha, which is coming down to our parampara and is meant for the shrota, means the hearers, those who are hearing the Harikatha. You won't block their experience. And therefore, whenever someone gives a class or does Harikatha, the energy in that place will be stimulated with spiritual emotion. If it becomes very dry, very rote, etc., then you need to, just like sometimes, if you have a home or anything, or apartment or anything, sometimes there's always some technology there that needs attending to. And a lot of times, if you call in to the person, it's the internet or something, you call into the internet provider, say, well, unplug it and plug it back in after 5 minutes, or do this, or check the connections. So in the same way, when we're not getting a sense of emotional experience from our practice of bhakti, which is described, Pratyakshvagamam damyam shushukam kartamavyayam. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has directly said, because it is giving pratyaksha darshan of your spiritual unfoldment when you're in tune with it, shushukam kartamavyam. The process is joyfully performed. Now also we have to begin to differentiate what we've been accustomed to calling joy and what is joy. That day that you were very tired, that day that you were feeling some discomfort, that your enthusiasm level was not as high, but you were doing your sudden bhajan anyway. You should also begin to appreciate those days, right, as also part of Susukham Kartamavyam, being very joyfully performed. Because that up and down is spiritual emotion, moving towards a steadiness of appreciating how Ananda is a experience of love, right? In other words, how will you understand how the gopis are experiencing Maha Ananda, the greatest bliss, at the same time they're suffering so much in separation from Krishna? How can you understand that emotion if you divide happiness and distress between how you're feeling in the execution of your practice even at various times? Oh, no, I'm not in happy practice now. Nothing's changed about Bhagavan. Bhagavan is still Anandamoy. He's still saturated with Ananda. Right? Radha and Krishna are still saturated with Ananda. So even in your ups and downs, you should feel, oh, the practice is still Susukham Kartamavyam. It's still joyfully done. Somehow or another, due to my unfolding and so forth, so on, I'm not experiencing now, but it is like that. So I won't attribute that lack of feeling joyful to the process, but only in my unfoldment that day, that time, my enthusiasm level wanes, my this wanes, and that will become less and less as you move closer to Nishta. When there's not so much influence from the material energy, so forth and so on, then you'll feel more of a steadiness, and that vacillating up and down, etc., like in Anastita Bhakti, Vyuda Vikalpa, etc., Gana Tarala. These are all the symptoms of Anistita Bhakti. You could read in Madhurya Khandamini. I'm not explaining everything here. Then you'll be able to appreciate. Understand? So the other question was regarding, I have to answer something right quick. Bear with me. Give me 1 second. This was kind of important. Let me take a second. Okay, so the other question dealt with something which many devotees, may not have much understanding of because it's not something that's directly in most people's devotional experience. But someone was asking me, they're doing research regarding the nature of the connections between traditional African forms of spirituality and Bhakti tradition. Because I spent many years, almost 8 years or 9 or something, doing service in Africa, and even prior to going to Africa, I had done research and so forth about this topic. They were inquiring about some of the connections, and they wanted it done on this forum. I guess they'll have friends and they'll watch this, and I guess that's where they will glean whatever information they're trying to glean from it. So, of course, there are, like, not only in the African cosmology, but in many spiritual traditions of antiquity, you'll find a sort of common thread in a lot of them. Because, really, there's only one spiritual tradition. That is love and service to God. That one tradition, or that one experience, that one spiritual reality has taken many shapes and forms according to time, place, circumstances, different levels of consciousness, etc., etc. So some of the things that you'll find in terms of commonalities between all of these things is that generally there's always a conception of a supreme being. And in most cultures of antiquity, that expression is both masculine and feminine in polarity. Right? So for instance, in Ghana, God is called Mawulisa, right? And it means the masculine and feminine form of God. In Kemetic traditions or ancient Egyptian situations, it is called Asara Set, or Greek said Isis and Osiris. Right? So you always have the masculine and feminine polarities of God. Of course, obviously, Radha Krishna, Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narayan, it's just completely manifest in Vedic culture. You see it all over, that there's always the masculine and feminine polarity, or the Shakti and Shakti Mum, or the power and the possessor of the power. Right? So one commonality you'll find in almost every spiritual tradition is that. Now, of course, some people say, well, wait, you don't see it as much in Hebraic tradition, or you don't see it as much in what is Christianity, which is, you know, sort of the development from Hebraic traditions, or an Islamic tradition. If you look very closely and you look very deeply in even those traditions, you will also find the same concept of a masculine and feminine polarity of God. Because if God is not complete, how can expressions be there in the creations that's not there in the Creator? So in other words, unless God had masculine and feminine polarity, how can we find those dynamics present in the creation, right? So I'm talking about understanding the nature of Genesis. In other words, you can't have something in the creation that wasn't present in the Creator. If I create a piece of art or a piece of music, there's something that's in me that manifests in that created thing, whether it's music or art or furniture, whatever it is, that is present in me. Other than that, it couldn't have been manifest from me in the shape or form of whatever it is. So in the absolute truth, in the absolute form of God, there must be the masculine and feminine polarity, one thing. Two, there's also a commonality of sort of empowered features of that form of God, which manifest as part of the universal administration, so to speak, of the creation, right? So, for instance, in Vedic culture, they're called devatas. For instance, in the culture of Ifa, or the Yoruba culture, which comes from the western part of Africa, which was very prominent because many of the people who manifested in the diaspora due to the slave trade came basically from that area, between Ghana, Nigeria, etc., etc. Slaves also came from other places, but that was a huge grouping had come from that area, right? And there, the conception of the absolute form of God is called Olodumare. And the administrative functionaries, so to speak, within the cosmos and the sort of personifications of the natural forces are called Orisha, right? So you find similarities there. In fact, I wrote an article, and I found the magazine some time ago. I think this had to be in 80, no, it couldn't have been in the 80s because I was already in Central Africa then. Had to be late 79 or 80 that I wrote an article for a magazine in Nigeria describing all this stuff, right? Describe the relationship between Vedic culture and the culture in Nigeria and so forth and so on. And I also remember going to one very sacred place in Nigeria. It is called Ife, right? Ile-Ife. So that place is like the birthplace in many ways of the culture of the spiritual cosmology of the Yoruba people. And of course, it has given expression in the diaspora in the due to the slave trade in various forms, like in Brazil in Candomblé, in Cuba in Lucumi, in the Western world it became like Santeria because there was some synthesis with Christianity because of the issues with the slave trade and all of that. But in that place, Ile-Ife, there's a huge university there. And I went there to do a book fair, actually, at the invitation of one person who was very steeped in that tradition, right? And one form of priesthood in that tradition is called Babalaos. And he was a Babala, but he's also a medical doctor and a professor at the university. So he hosted me, and we did the book fair. I took a bunch of, obviously, Srila Prabhupada's books and so forth and so on. And also, at nighttime, at his home, he would gather a bunch of professors and some students, mostly professors from the University of Ife, and we'd have talks on the relationship between Vedic culture and the culture of Ifa, etc., etc. So it was extremely interesting. I wish I had maintained recordings or something of that, because there was a lot of information exchanged regarding the similarities between that. The people who are doing this particular research are focused on that element because that is the predominance of the African cosmological expression in the diaspora, right? Because most people came from that particular section, right? Those who came from Benin, right, which is also West Africa, that place was called Dahomey. Those who came in the slave trade from that area predominantly ended up like in Haiti, right? And that's from where you get Vodun, right? So Vodun, or Voodoo, people say, but it's called Vodun. That was the religious tradition there, and you'll find many of the similarities of a supreme form of God, and then you'll find relationship with the lower, which are like Orishas or like Devatas, etc., etc. So there is a sort of thread that runs through these traditions. Not only that, but even in the practices, you'll find some similarities. Like if you look in, especially I'll use the diaspora more because I've, you know, there are more people who, as far as this research is concerned, have seen and been experienced with that. Some of these people have not even been to Africa. And in Africa, there are some differences. Like, because obviously in the diaspora, right, because of the slave trade, there were some things which were not maintained in a pristine way. So because of slavery, people had to do what they could do to maintain whatever spiritual traditions and so forth were there. So right now in the diaspora, there's two traditions which are very prominent. One is called Iseshe, which refers to tradition, literally, from the African perspective, because now that you have more contact with Africa, you have the internet, you have so many other vehicles, there is more of a prominence of the teachings and philosophy and other things coming from that side. So it's called Iseshe. The other side is the Lukumi side. Lukumi really was a term that was used in the diaspora because people had come from different tribal elements within the Yoruba community, and Lukumi meant like my friend, right? So it's a way of identifying. There's some other nuances here, but I don't think it's apropos for what we're trying to do here, right? So there are two kind of traditions, and most people who I'm speaking to here are more familiar with the Lukumi side, right? So on the Lukumi side, if you go and you look at anyone's altar, you'll see that they have a situation where they have the altar and they have that particular Orisha. Normally the Orishas are maintained in Otanes, means stones, right? So there's a connection there as well, because one form of worship in the Vedic tradition is of the Shalagram Shila. A Shila means stone. There's some special things obviously around that. And also Giriraj or Govardhan, which is another form of Shila, stone, right? So you find some similarities there, even though there's some theological differences and so forth and so on, but still you see certain cultural phenomena that's consistent. Also, you'll see the idea of making offerings. So there's a sort of persona involved in the worship. It's not sort of impersonal. There is an idea that of course in the Lukumi tradition, the idea is that Olodumare is the supreme God, but in the affairs of mankind, Olodumare is removed. And that's not really that different from Vaishnav culture as well, or Vedic culture as well, because we don't consider that, for instance, Radha and Krishna are concerned with or deal with so much the average activities of the material world, right? That's an attainment of a purely spiritual nature, right? The administrators of the material elements, like the Devatas, Indra for rain, and then you have Brahma, who's the creator. In a similar way, in the tradition coming from the Ifa Yoruba tradition, manifest as Lukumi, here you have various Orisha. Like Obatala is very similar to Lord Brahma in terms of the sort of theological relationship. Indra is very similar to Chango in the theological relationship. You know, the Ibeji are very similar to Ashwini and Kumars, right? So you find all kinds of similarities there, and also the fact that there's some persona involved in the mode of worship. It's not an impersonal thing, right? They have a way of offering, you know, various foods and so forth that are the liked foods of that particular Orisha and so forth and so on. But they consider that Olodumare is removed from the dynamic of day-to-day life of people, and therefore we serve Olodumare, or they serve Olodumare through the medium of the Orisha, right? in the Vaishnava tradition, especially among the traditions, because if you look at the Vedic cosmology as a whole, or India as a whole, you'll see very similar things. There are people who worship Durga Ma, Indra, Surya, Ganesh, right? Under the same ideal that, Bhagavan is beyond the scope of our day-to-day lives, and therefore we're worshiping this Devata for these particular things. Oh, may Lakshmi Devi, right? Or Saraswati Devi, bless my child to be very learned in school, right? If you want children, some people worship the Ashwini Kumaras to have children, right? So you find very, very similar things in the general thing, but in our particular Vaishnava line, it focuses on getting free from the material side of existence and focusing purely and clearly on the spiritual side. So everything is geared towards the absolute personality of Godhead, whom we identify as Radha and Krishna, masculine and feminine polarity, right? So that's our focus. There is no focus that, yes, I want material things. Our focus is that human life is meant to understand this absolute fact. You understand? But in all other ways, you find so much similarity between the true traditions. So I don't think there's a scope here for me unless I was going to just dedicate a whole thing to it. I'm just responding to a question of a friend of mine. Actually, he's a very good friend of mine. And again, it's somebody who, during the course of my musical career, we had some connection. And Moksha Prabhu, not you. This is another person asking questions. I'll talk to you about it. But there's another person who's asking questions about the same thing. So yeah, I don't think I can cover everything, but I tried to give some idea of some of the similarities. And really, when you narrow everything down to the spiritual science, so to speak, you'll see that all over the world, no matter where it was, what tradition it was, you can trace out elements like that cosmologically. And that's how you'll know that there was a one related culture at one point, right? So, obviously that's a whole separate kind of class and discussion. And I think at one point I did have the notion, because there are a lot of devotees who have had experience within the Lukumi tradition or other cosmologies and so forth. And at one point, there's a very nice devotee in Chicago who has had experience with both. And we were going to do like a forum to invite people from both traditions to sit and have this kind of discussion. So maybe that will arise in the future, but just between everything else going on, I've just not really had the time to focus in and get that done. But certainly I'll pray to Sri Guru Gauranga that there'll be some arrangement that I can actually facilitate that, because I just think it would be very wholesome and healthy as a spiritually unifying, for one, but also spiritually uplifting idea to start seeing the common thread and also seeing the ultimate goal being the same. All right, so I think I'll end here. And again, my dandavats to all devotees. Vancha kalpatarubhesha kripa sindhuvayevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.